When I saw the wolf lying dead at the edge of the trail, my vision went dark for a moment because I understood he was not alone. I start every morning before dawn, trudging through damp undergrowth to check the old wire snares I set months ago. The forest is quiet then, the only sound my own boots brushing fallen leaves. I know these woods better than I know my own hands. Every mossy rock, every bent sapling tells me a story. Today, though, as the first pale light seeped between the birches, something unmistakable stopped me cold. He lay on his side, one front leg bent at an odd angle, a dark stain blooming across his ribs. A single bullet hole had ended his life hours ago, judging by the stiff rigor setting into his muscles. Nearby, the earth was churned, footprints too large for any deer, fresh human prints pressed into the soil. I knelt beside him, touched his coarse fur, and felt the heat still lingering in his body. Anger flared in me. Some poacher thought he could kill without consequence. But then I sensed movement, a whisper of life deeper in the brush. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the forest playing tricks in the half-light. Then she stepped out, a she-wolf, her coat a mix of ash and silver, eyes shining with an intelligence that made my heart hammer. She didn't flee. She didn't snarl. She simply stood, a silent sentinel, her gaze fixed on me with unsettling calm. Time slowed. I felt the weight of her stare drill through me. In her eyes there was neither grief nor rage. It was something else altogether, an appraisal, as though she measured my worth in a single, unblinking glance. My breath caught. I wanted to speak, to explain that I was not the one who pulled the trigger, but the words wouldn't come. I thought she would vanish, like all the animals do when a human appears. I thought she would melt back into the trees, leaving me alone with death and my own guilt. But she stayed. She watched me crouch by her fallen companion, watched as I reached out a shaking hand to close his eyes, to whisper a quiet apology into the chill air. Even then, I was convinced she would slip away the moment I turned my back. Yet she remained, her silhouette rigid, every muscle coiled in silent protest. She let me kneel over him, let me draw a length of cloth from my pack to lay across his muzzle. I could taste my own disbelief. How could she tolerate my presence, this stranger, at the side of her mate? I stood, backing away slowly so as not to startle her. My heart pounded so fiercely I expected the woman I rescued him from to hear it miles away. The forest felt denser now, as if every tree leaned in to witness what was unfolding. A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and in that instant I sensed a shift in her posture. Her head tilted, ears flicking as she tracked some sound I couldn't hear. I half expected her to bolt. Instead, she turned her gaze back to me just for a heartbeat and then returned her eyes to the fallen wolf. I thought that was the end, her sorrowful vigil beside her companion, mine to bear alone after she left. But she did not go. She stayed. She stayed, watching as I placed a sprig of spruce on his breast, marking him with a token of respect. She stayed through the last dying light, even as shadows lengthened and the air grew colder. And she stayed as I took my final step away, feeling her eyes follow me until I could no longer see her shape in the gloom. I walked back to my cabin with the hollow echo of her presence in my mind, lungs burning with cold and adrenaline. I tried to sleep, but every snap of a twig outside my window made me sit bolt upright, convinced she had slipped through the trees behind me. When the first pale glow of morning came, I shouldered my gear and went back to the trail. Her tracks were there, paw prints pressed deep into soft earth, circling the spot like a ritual. And beneath them, faint signs of another presence, the small, delicate tracks of a younger wolf, stepping gingerly into his place beside the fallen one. I knelt again, placing my hand on the spot where she had lingered. A tremor passed through me, part dread, part awe. I realized then that I was not simply an intruder in their world. I was a witness to something I could not explain, something that demanded respect. I walked away that second time with tears in my eyes, convinced I would never return. But I will, because she is waiting. When she turned and began to slip back into the shadows, I stood frozen. Her head never wavered, those silver eyes remained fixed on me as if begging me to follow or to stay. My boots felt heavy on the moss, every instinct urging me to run, to escape this primal courtroom where I was the accused. But something held me fast, the weight of that silent gaze, the knowledge that I could not simply leave him here. I swallowed hard and shifted my pack off one shoulder. I don't know why, I whispered to the forest, but I can't leave him like this. My hands fumbled for the small folding shovel I always carried. I knelt beside the wolf's still body, lips moving in a silent apology I could not voice. Leaf litter shifted under my knees as I began to dig, each shovelful of dirt feeling like a confession of guilt. Halfway through the shallow grave, a low sound rippled through the trees, a single, stretched-out howl, as even and unwavering as a church bell at midnight. My heart stuttered. I paused, blade in hand, eyes sweeping the dark trunks. The howl echoed again, closer this time, and I realized it was coming from the very place where I'd left her vigil. I froze. The howl faded into silence, and then I saw her emerge once more, the she-wolf, stepping from the undergrowth with deliberate grace. But she was not alone. Behind her padded the figure of a younger wolf, its coat still mottled with the soft gray of adolescence. His legs were gangly, his spine slightly arched in uncertainty. He glanced at me, then at the fallen king of their pack, and hesitated. My breath caught in my throat. She guided him to the edge of the pit, her head held high. I dropped the shovel and backed away. Together, they approached the corpse, the elder taking position at his side, the youngster slipping into the exact spot where his mate lay. They formed a silent circle of three, as though enacting some rite I could not comprehend. I swallowed, telling myself, they're just animals. They're performing a ritual of grief. I half expected the she-wolf to lower her head and let loose a mournful, keening wail, an acknowledgement of farewell. I thought they would linger a moment longer, then turn and depart, leaving me to bury him in peace. But that was not what happened. As I inhaled, preparing to step forward and finish the burial, the she-wolf stiffened. Her ears flattened slightly and her hackles rose. With a sharp bark of warning, she lunged at the young wolf, driving him back by a few paces. He yelped softly, sliding on mossy ground, and looked up at her with wide, fear-tinged eyes. She stood her ground, every muscle tensed. Then she turned her head toward me, her gaze so intent it felt as though it could pierce my chest. In that moment, I realized she was not content to mourn or to teach her pup a lesson in grief. She was waiting for me. The weight of expectation pressed down on me like the burdens I'd carried all my life. I was not here to bury a wolf, I was here to act as their witness, their accomplice in something far greater than death. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. I understand, I murmured, though I wasn't sure I did. My fingers closed around the shovel handle again, this time with resolve. I began to scoop the last of the earth back into the pit, each handful a promise that I would honor this moment, that I would stand by them. The young wolf watched me with uncertain hope, the she-wolf watched me with fierce intensity. By the time I stepped back, the grave was filled, the earth mounded high in a small cairn. I placed my palm flat against the shaken ground, closing my eyes. I felt the tremor of my own heartbeat, the steady rhythm of the forest reclaiming its silence. When I opened my eyes, both wolves were still there, she at my elbow, he a pace behind, following her cue. I straightened and lifted my pack, my legs unsteady. She gave a single nod, just the slightest incline of her dark head, and turned to melt back into the trees with her apprentice at her side. I watched until the last sliver of their forms disappeared, until only the empty forest remained, alive with whispered leaves and secrets. I stood alone beside the fresh mound, breath ragged, mind numb. My hands were stained with soil and something far deeper, my own shaken conviction that I had just witnessed another realm of life, one where loss became lesson and trust was forged in the face of death. As I turned toward the trail, I glanced back only once, half expecting to see her eyes watching me still. She was gone, but I knew she had left a part of herself behind, a challenge, a vow, a question I could not yet answer. And I realized I would return. When I stepped back from the fresh mound, I felt her presence like a weight at my side. The she-wolf did not retreat into the shadows. Instead, she shifted her stance, each sinew in her lean body taut as a bowstring, and followed me. My heartbeat rattled in my ears as I lifted my pack and took a cautious step. She matched me pace for pace, as never leaving my face. I stopped and dropped the pack as if compelled by some unseen force. "I'm not your enemy," I whispered, voice rough with cold and awe. "I didn't kill him." The words felt absurd, like trying to reason with the wind. Yet I spoke them aloud because she deserved explanation, even if she would never understand human speech. I watched for any flicker of fury in her glare, but all I saw was calculation. A soft rustle announced the young wolf's approach. He crept forward on delicate paws, head low, tail wagging in cautious greeting. As he neared, the she-wolf let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound that reverberated through my bones. She stepped between us, hackles raised, warning him back. Her eyes blazed, not with anger, but with clear intent. I had violated their world, and now I must prove myself worthy. Cold sweat trickled down my spine. I knelt, gathering my shovel. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped it. I knew what she wanted. I could feel it in her unwavering gaze. It wasn't enough that I'd buried him. I had to do it on their terms, in the sanctity of their presence. I swallowed past a lump in my throat and rose again, shovel in hand. She backed up a few feet, stance relaxed but alert, as if granting me an audience to atone. The young wolf ducked his head and padded off to the side, leaving only the three of us in a rough triangle. My breath hitched. I set the blade against the earth and began to dig a new, deeper pit, one respectful of his spirit, one that mirrored the care they showed the dead. Each scoop of soil felt like an offering. I could feel her watching my every movement, the way my shoulders slumped with fatigue, the way my eyes burned with unshed tears. The forest held its breath, the only sound the muffled scrape of blade against dirt. With each turn of my wrist, I murmured words that sprang from someplace deeper than thought. I'm sorry. I honor him. I see you. At last, the pit yawned wide enough. I lifted his body once more and laid him gently into the hollow. The she-wolf stepped forward, sniffed the edge, then fell silent. I covered him slowly, mound by mound, until only a gentle hill of earth remained. I placed a hand flat against the top, closing my eyes and feeling the steady pulse of life in the living world around me. When I looked up, she was gone, vanished into the trees so completely I half expected her to be nothing but wind. The young wolf slipped after her, pausing only to glance back as though to confirm I had fulfilled my part. I exhaled, a shaky breath that seemed to carry all the tension from my limbs. I straightened and brushed dirt from my knees, conviction and relief flooding my chest. I thought it was over. I believed they had come to mourn, to teach, and now they had forgiven me. I imagined them disappearing forever, leaving me to wander back to my cabin, my heart a little lighter than before. But dawn had other plans. When light crept into the sky, I found myself drawn back to that secret hollow by an urge I could not resist. The ground trembled under my boots as I followed the faint trail back through the birches. And there they were, two sets of tracks circling the mound, paw prints pressed deep into soft soil. They had spent the night at the grave's edge, keeping vigil long after I'd left. I knelt once more beside the gentle rise, fingertips grazing cool earth. My chest tightened. They had stayed with him, together, through the darkest hours, guardians of memory. I lifted my gaze to the silent treeline, expecting to see them emerge and acknowledge me. But the forest held only emptiness, save for the heavy hush of its ancient breath. I realized then that they had not forgiven me, they had entrusted me. They'd shown me that in their world, loss was never final, and respect was the bridge between human and wild. I rose in the gray dawn and turned away, uncertainty and wonder warring within me. Behind me, the prince remained, two wolves bound by instinct and grief, two ghosts reminding me that some debts cannot be paid in a single night. And I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that I would return. When dawn crept pale across the birch trunks, I settled into the hollow of a fallen log, rifle laid aside, eyes trained on the soft rise of earth that marked their vigil. The night had been long, my bones ached with cold, but I could not tear myself away. I needed to see how far their loyalty would carry them. I pressed my cheek against the rough bark and waited, breath pluming like ghostly spirits in the chill air. At first, nothing moved. The forest yawned awake to bird calls and the rusty whisper of needles under tiny feet. Then, a slender, gray shape melted from the undergrowth, a young wolf, tentative as a child taking its first steps. He padded to the crest of the burial mound and lowered himself into the very spot where the elder had fallen. His ribs rose and fell in slow rhythm as if he, too, bore the weight of death in his chest. My heart thundered. I watched, breath caught, as he lay there time and again, at dawn, at midday, and then under the blood-red brush of sunset. Each time, he seemed to practice the role of the departed, settling into the hollow as though trying on a garment that did not fit, yet refusing to leave until he had learned its shape. Always by his side, the she-wolf watched. She crouched on the ridge above, ears tilted forward, eyes steady. But she never barked lessons or chased him off. She simply waited, patient as the mountain, still as the gathering dusk, giving him space to learn the unspoken language of their loss. One evening, under a sky threaded with violet light, the youngster raised his head. His muzzle pointed skyward, and from deep within his chest came a long, clear howl. The sound quivered through the forest like a tuning fork struck at midnight. It warped the air, bending the hush around me until I felt as though the trees themselves leaned in to listen. My breath hitched so hard I thought I'd choke. The howl carried the timbre of the fallen wolf, familiar yet impossible, as though grief itself had taken a voice. It was not a farewell but a challenge. I am still here. I live on. In that moment, I knew they were not enacting a funeral rite. They were forging a legacy. I dropped my head into my hands, tears stinging my eyes. He was taking his place, filling the space left behind, carrying the story forward. I felt privileged and terrified at once. I was witness to a covenant older than memory, a covenant that bound wolf to wolf, life to death, past to future. I dared to exhale, and the final echoes of that howl drifted away. I thought then that this was their ritual complete, that I would pack up at first light and leave them to their secrets. My heart stilled with acceptance. I had seen enough to know the depth of their bond. But nature is never content to follow our tidy scripts. Before I could rise, a soft snap of twig announced her return. The she-wolf slipped from the shadows, padding silently to the very spot where I had watched the pup. My chest constricted as she drew close to that bare circle of earth, the place where only hours before I had lain witness. She paused, head lowered, and inhaled deeply. Her breath trembled the fallen leaves at her feet. For a long moment, she remained like that, nostrils flaring, the world narrowed to scent and memory. It was as though she sought the imprint of my presence, the faint echo of human fear and wonder mixed with the metallic tang of soil and sweat. My throat went dry. I dared not breathe. I felt exposed, a lone intruder laid bare by her scrutiny. Yet in her gaze there was no anger, only an unspoken question. What did you learn here? I swallowed, and the answer rose from somewhere deep inside me. Respect. Awe. Humility. She lifted her head, ears flicking back, and turned away from the mound. The young wolf rose to follow, hesitating only at her side. Together, they melted into the birchwood, leaving the silent earth behind. No howl, no glance back, only the soft whisper of paws on moss. I sat until the last breath of their presence faded, until the forest felt once more empty of wonder. Then, at last, I rose, legs trembling under me. The morning sun had burned silver into the bark, and dew glittered like scattered diamonds across the clearing. I knelt and laid my palm on that hollowed circle of earth, tracing the imprint of wolf paws and human grief. I closed my eyes and offered a silent vow. I would carry their lesson into the world of men. I would remember that life survives, that loss can be a teacher, and that respect for the wild runs deeper than fear. As I walked back to the trail, I glanced once more at the silent grove. A chill breeze rustled the canopy, and I could almost hear the echo of that impossible, perfect howl lingering in the air. My heart throbbed with something new, reverence for the secret lives of those who share these woods, and the knowledge that I had been given a story I would never forget. I could not shake the restless pull drawing me back to that burial mound. Long before dawn, I packed a small kit, bandages, antiseptic, the stub of an old knife I used for splitting wood, and slipped into the forest under a sky still heavy with stars. The air was crisp, each breath a cloud of white that disappeared into the dark. Every snapped twig underfoot sounded like a warning, but I kept moving, driven by an urgency I barely understood. When I reached the clearing where the earth still rose in that gentle hill, I froze. There, framed by birches ghosted in moonlight, stood the she-wolf, alone, patient, as though awaiting my arrival. My heart thundered so loud I thought she must hear it, but she didn't flinch. She simply watched me, coat silvered by dawn, and inhaled a steady breath that misted in the cold air. I swallowed and stepped forward. Each footfall felt heavy, as though I carried the weight of every shot ever fired in this forest. Yet she did not retreat. She did not snap or growl. She stood her ground, eyes fixed on mine, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled in watchful calm. My chest tightened. In her presence, every doubt I'd ever had about respecting the wild surged up like poison. Then I saw it along her flank, half hidden beneath her tawny fur, a scar that ran jagged from her shoulder toward her hip. Old and weathered, as if made seasons ago, but still raw enough that each breath caused the skin to twitch. My throat went dry. Whoever shot her clearly hit more than once. Her limp was subtle but there. She lifted her head higher, turning slightly so that I could see the wound more clearly. I knelt, arms shaking, and spoke softly, "I won't hurt you." The forest held its breath. She let her breath out in a shuddering sigh, and I pressed a hand against her flank, feeling the slight dip where muscle had been lost. I tore a strip of cloth from my shirt and dripped antiseptic onto it, hands trembling as I knelt beside this creature I had only ever studied from afar. As I cleaned the scar, she watched me with those dark, fathomless eyes. Not fear. Not defiance. Something deeper, acceptance? Gratitude? Her flank twitched each time I dabbed a new swab, but she stayed still, trusting. I could feel my own pulse in my fingertips, a steady throb that matched the rhythm of her heart. Somewhere beyond words, we were speaking the same language of vulnerability and care. When I finally wrapped the makeshift bandage, I leaned back on my heels and she took a slow, deliberate step forward, noses brushing my palm. It was a gesture of connection, a breach in the boundary between human and wild. I closed my eyes as a single tear slipped down my cheek. In that moment, I understood that we were both part of something greater than ourselves, a fragile communion in the silence of the forest. I whispered, voice thick, "Thank you for trusting me." Her ears flicked and she lifted her muzzle, inhaling deep. Then she turned her head toward the trees as if calling me to look. I followed her gaze and saw, pressed into the soft earth, the faint outline of paw prints, smaller, leaner, the shape of young toes splayed in cautious hope. My breath caught. The young wolf had been here all along, watching us. He had witnessed our fragile alliance and chosen to grant me his trust as well. My chest swelled with a bittersweet rush. I felt honored, awed, and unworthy all at once. I rose slowly, careful not to break the spell. The she-wolf held my gaze a moment longer, nostrils flaring in one last intake of the mingled scents of earth, blood, sweat, and care. Then, with the dignified grace of a monarch on her throne, she turned and strode back into the trees. The young wolf followed, pausing only to glance at me, eyes bright with intelligence, before melting into the dim light. In the hush that followed, I knelt and touched the spot where she had stood, fingertips grazing the woven fibers of the bandage. The forest seemed to exhale, releasing the tension I had not known I carried. I felt cleansed, reborn in the quiet cathedral of birches and moss. I gathered my kit and stood, legs unsteady but spirit alight. I whispered into the dawn, "We are bound now, you and I. I will never forget." Behind me, the delivery of silent paws faded into the undergrowth. Ahead, the trail beckoned back to human roads and the warm glow of my cabin. But I knew the real journey was only beginning. I had crossed the threshold into a world of shared trust and whispered promises, a world where a wounded wolf could teach a man about forgiveness and where the bond between predator and protector ran deeper than blood. As I stepped onto the path home, I carried more than stories. I carried a living testament to the wisdom of the wild. By the third week after the dawn in the clearing, I'd stopped sleeping soundly. My mind kept returning to the pack's vigil, the echo of that perfect howl. I'd begun leaving my cabin door cracked at night, half hoping for a glimpse of them under the silver glow of the moon. One morning just before sunrise, I stepped onto the porch with a steaming cup of coffee and nearly stumbled over something laid on the planks, the rib cage of a rabbit, cleaned of flesh and placed with almost ceremonial care. My breath caught in my throat. The young wolf had left me a gift. His paw prints led away into the woods, small, tentative, but unmistakable. My heart swelled with a gratitude I couldn't name. I knelt, touching the smooth bone, and whispered thank you, though I knew he would never hear me. In the days that followed, I found more offerings, a half-picked fish draped over a fallen log, a tangled tuft of fur pinned to a stump like an emblem. Each time, I felt as though the forest itself was teaching me, showing me the rules of a world I'd only glimpsed. I would accept the gift, leave a whispered blessing, and watch the young wolf emerge from the shadows to study me with those curious golden eyes. Then came the morning when snow lay thick on the ground, each branch heavy with ice. I bundled into my coat and stepped outside, expecting silence, but the world was alive with tracks. 3 sets of paw prints led from the tree up my little path and fanned out across the porch. 3. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The smallest set belonged to the young wolf, of course. His toes splayed in hopeful arcs. Next to his were the broad, sure imprints of the she-wolf I'd helped heal. But there was a third set. slender, deeper than the pups, smaller than the adults, pressed deliberately beside them. I knelt again in the snow, fingertips tracing the lines. Who had joined them? Another adolescent? A stranger drawn by the scent of tribute? And what had become of that lone sentinel who once stood alone with grief in her eyes? My mind raced with questions. I stamped my boots to shake snow from the porch, hoping the answers would come in the shape of living forms rather than footprints on frost. At midday, I heard the soft pad-pad of paws and stepped onto the porch. The 3 wolves stood at the tree line, watching. The young wolf saw me first, ears lifting in recognition. Then the newcomer slipped forward, elegant and lithe, coat a dusky brown that blended into bark and shadow. The she-wolf appeared last, stepping from behind a birch with measured grace. But this time, she fell back, staying a silent guardian while the young wolf took the lead. He edged forward, head low in invitation, and I felt tears burn my eyes. He did not bring a gift this time. Instead, he nosed the snow beside my boots, then backed away, as if beckoning me to follow him. I hesitated only a heartbeat before slipping off my boots and padding, sock-footed, into the clearing. Each breath puffed in front of me. Each heartbeat throbbed with wonder. I followed his prints until he paused at the edge of a small pool, half frozen. The ice cracked like fractured glass. Reflected in the water were birch trunks and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. I knelt and cupped a handful of pool water, letting it trickle through my fingers. When I looked up, the young wolf was gone, slipped away like a spirit. I heard a rustle behind me and turned to see the she-wolf emerge from the woods once more. She walked toward me, each step heavy with purpose, and stopped within arm's reach. Unlike before, she did not demand anything. She simply stood, head lowered, eyes soft with something I can only call understanding. My chest tightened. I thought, this is it. This is our final communion. I need do nothing more. I exhaled slowly, bracing myself for her departure. I half expected her to turn on silent pause and vanish forever, leaving me with the echo of 3 sets of prints in the snow. That would have been a fitting end, I thought. A graceful exit of wild spirits returning to untouched realms. But she had one last gift. With a gentle sway of her head, she tilted her gaze at me, direct, unblinking, then lifted a forepaw and rested it beside my boot, pressing shoulder height against the frozen ground. Her eyes softened as if to say, "Remember this." I felt the warmth of her presence seep through the sole of my sock, bypassing cold and fear and landing in the steadiness of my chest. Then, as softly as she'd come, she turned. The 3rd wolf, a stranger or perhaps a forgotten sibling, slipped behind her, and the 3 faded into the birches, leaving only the hush of snow falling through branches. I stood alone in the clearing, heart both heavy and luminous. I pressed my palm to the place where her paw had lain, feeling the last pulse of life that bound us. I understood then that the threshold had shifted. I was no longer merely observer or caretaker. I had become part of their story, part of a hidden world where trust could bridge the chasm between man and beast. When I finally made my way back to the cabin, my footprints in the snow wove through theirs like a promise. I would return to this sacred place, again and again, guided by the silent gifts and the unspoken farewells of wolves who had taught me that the deepest bonds are forged not in speech, but in shared acts of faith. Spring arrived with tentative warmth, and I found myself drawn back to that sacred clearing as soon as the snow thawed. I told myself I was merely checking. The forest changes so swiftly. I needed to see if the burial mound had settled, whether the earth had healed. But truth was, I ached to know if they remembered. I slipped through the birch trunks just before dawn, the air rich with the scent of moss and fresh growth. The forest floor was bare now, no melting snow, no footprints to follow. My heart pinched as I stepped into the clearing. Everything looked as I had left it. Ferns unfurling like green flames, birdsong drifting through the branches, shafts of pale light touching the earth. And yet, the burial site was different. The ground that I'd mounded so carefully was now smoothed and level, as though someone had come behind me and paid deeper respect. In the center lay a small pile of white bones, delicate rabbit bones, washed clean and arranged in a quiet offering. My breath hitched. I bent and picked up the long femur, running my thumb over its curve. They had returned. To honor him. To say, we live on. I felt tears prick my eyes, tears of wonder and sorrow entwined. I pressed the bone back where I'd found it, then knelt, hands resting on the cool, tilled earth. Spring's first warmth burst in my chest, the gift of life woven through death, promise rising from the soil. I stood and backed away, torn between wanting to linger and fearing to intrude on their ceremony. The forest held its breath around me. I thought I'd seen all there was to see, that their journey had reached its end. The rabbit bones felt like a final punctuation mark. Then, as the golden light of sunset spilled through the canopy, I heard a soft rustle on the hillside above. I froze. Two silhouettes emerged, lean shapes outlined against the fading sky. My breath stuttered in my throat. One was the she-wolf, moving with regal calm, head held high. Beside her padded a second adult wolf, his coat bearing the same silver sheen I'd seen that first morning. And then my heart stopped. Behind them, stepping carefully in their prints, came a third figure, smaller and straighter in stance. Its gait, its posture, even the way its head tilted as it paused. It was the wolf I had once laid to rest. Or so it seemed, reborn in this new body, this living echo. I sank to one knee, tears spilling down my cheeks. The sky flared pink, and for a moment the world held still. My mind reeled. Memory does not die. It lives on in flesh, in spirit, in the howl that carries across generations. They had given him life again, gifted him to the future. I murmured, voice thick, you carry him still. The she-wolf halted and raised her head. From her throat came a single, clear howl, long and unwavering, the same precise note that had rolled through the forest that first dawn. My heart twisted. Was it her voice or his? Had she spoken on his behalf, or had he lent his spirit to her song? I pressed my palm to my mouth, stifling a sob. As the last notes faded, the three wolves turned and padded to the burial mound. The young one, the new echo about his head, and pressed his muzzle to the rabbit bones, then sniffed the earth where I had knelt. He lifted his gaze to me, eyes shining in the dying light. I bowed my head in return, words lodged in my throat. All the lessons they taught me, respect, gratitude, the fragile bond between man and wild, rushed home like a flood. Then, as if obeying a final, unspoken command, they melted into the trees. The hillside swallowed them, the day slipped into night, and the clearing grew still once more. I stood alone beneath the birches, tears drying on my cheeks, chest tight with awe. The wind stirred, carrying the faint echo of that impossible howl. I closed my eyes, breathing in the pulse of the forest, the rhythm of life coursing through roots and leaves, paws and hearts. I will return, I vowed. I will remember this moment. How death gave way to life, how memory found its voice, how the impossible became real before my eyes. And as I walked back through the silent woods, I felt a new story taking root inside me, one I would carry forever, a testament to the wisdom of wolves, the eternity of memory, and the quiet miracles that happen when we learn to listen. Since that spring when they returned as three, I have walked that path every year. Each return feels like crossing a threshold into sacred ground where the veil between worlds thins. At first, the signs were vivid. One spring I knelt by the mound and found a single silver hair tangled in the moss, a quiet testament that someone had lain there again. The next year, I discovered a fragment of bone, bleached smooth by time and sun, laid just off to the side as if someone placed it with care. My breath caught when I brushed it with a fingertip. Then came seasons when the clearing lay undisturbed. No hair, no bone, only the shift of light through birches, the hush of ferns unfurling. I felt the earth settle, the story close its circle. And yet, each spring I returned, drawn by something deeper than memory. I would stand before the silent mound, hand resting on the worn earth, and whisper a greeting to ghosts. The forest would answer with birdsong and the slow drip of sap. I carried my solitude like an offering, honoring the bond we forged. Then, one winter night, months after a spring return, I awoke to a scratching at my door. My cabin windows were dark. Outside, the world was blanketed in snow. My heart thundered as I crept from my bed, grabbed the lantern, and stepped onto the porch. The snow was undisturbed, no footprints in sight. Yet the sound had been real, a soft, insistent scrape as if someone's paw or finger raked the wood. I strained my eyes into the black and saw nothing. Just the silent trees, bowed under snow, and the lantern's weak circle of light. My pulse throbbed. I leaned forward, listening. Nothing but wind teasing the eaves. Then I noticed a line of tiny tracks at the edge of the porch, 5 pads pressed into fresh snow leading away toward the forest. Morning broke cold and clear. I pulled on boots and coat and followed the tracks past the mossy stones, past the birch grove, until they faded where the brown earth showed through. My steps carried me to the old burial site. There, in the soft soil, sprouted a single snowdrop, Earth's first white star of spring. I knelt, breath visible in thin air, heart squeezing with wonder. A single flower. A quiet miracle where death had lain. I thought coincidence. A stray bulb, a passing animal unearthing it. Or perhaps an adventurer transported it. But I know better. Nature does not leave loose threads. Every petal, every footprint carries intent. The snowdrop was more than a bloom, it was a message. A sign that life endures in silence. That memory roots itself deep and can flower again even after long stillness. I pressed my palm to the ground, feeling its pulse beneath the frost. In the hush of the forest, I heard the echo of distant howls, not in sound, but in certainty. The cycle had not ended, it had merely entered a new season of quiet. I rose, brushing snow from my knees. I carried that snowdrop's image with me, the fragile herald of hope, as I walked back through the birches. Each step felt lighter, each breath sweeter. I understood then that the story was never mine alone to tell. It belonged to the earth, to the wolves, to every ending that blossoms into a beginning. And so I return each year to stand in that clearing and listen for the faintest scrape at my door, for a single hair in the grass, for the first brave snowdrop breaking through the cold. Because in this world, I have learned nothing is ever truly still. Everything speaks if we will only learn to hear. I find myself thinking of her more often with each passing year. Sometimes I wake before dawn, heart hammering with the memory of silver eyes in the half-light, and I wonder why she chose me. Why did the she-wolf stand guard beside her fallen mate when every instinct should have driven her away? Why did she wait for my hand on the shovel, my apologies whispered on the wind? Perhaps I was meant to be witness. Or perhaps I became part of a ritual that the wild rarely shares with humans. I have questioned it 1,000 times, pacing my cabin floor as shadows of birches danced across the walls. I've told neighbors I found peace in those woods, but the truth is that I still feel the weight of her gaze, like a living thing pressing against my spine. I've gone through my old journals, pages yellowed with time, where I sketched paw prints in shaky ink and jotted fragments of their howls. I've sifted through photographs I took on shaky mornings, a blurred silhouette of the young wolf learning the shape of loss, a half-glimpse of the she-wolf's flank as she slipped back into the trees. I almost set those images aside as relics of grief until one afternoon I held a print to the window and froze. There, staring back at me from the grainy print, was her face framed by birch trunks. Her eyes locked onto mine, direct, unflinching, as if she knew this image would find me years later. I felt my breath catch. I stood in the dusty cabin light, sweat prickling my brow. My hands trembled as tears spilled down my cheeks. I realized then that I had been given more than a story. I had been handed a secret vigil, a promise etched in fur and bone. I sank to my knees and let the sobs come, raw and unforgettable. In that moment, I understood that the wild remembers us, every kindness, every wrong, long after we have left its borders. If you feel that this is more than just a story, if your heart also leaps at the thought of ancient pacts between man and beast, subscribe. Nature is full of mysteries, and together we can uncover the quiet wonder of those who roam beyond our fences. I don't believe in miracles. I never have. And yet this happened. I saw it with my own eyes. I felt the bone-cold frost under my palms, heard the echo of a howl reborn across seasons, tasted the grit of earth that held both death and rebirth. I was there when the she-wolf entrusted me with her pain, and when her pup learned to carry his father's memory in his own howl. I watch as they honor their lost year after year, leaving behind gifts of rabbit bones, tufts of fur, even a single silver hair to remind me that they lived on. And now I know one thing: animals remember. They love. They pass on what we have long forgotten: honesty bound to survival and the knowledge that every ending can become a beginning. If your heart is trembling with "or right now," type "nature is wiser than us."